Hey guys, what's up and welcome back to my channel. So I have a very fun video that I'm hoping you guys love. I'm gonna be ranking all 20 of my Glamlite palettes. This is gonna be fun, a little bit hard for me, but I have 20 palettes to rank from Glamlite. I also feel like this is a really good video for you to see kind of like my Glamlite collection and make a decision on if you want to check these palettes out, if you want to skip over these palettes, or if you've just been thinking about these palettes and wanted to hear my thoughts on them. So without further ado, let's get into the video. We're coming in hot, okay, with my least favorite Glamlite palette. And that one goes to the Hershey Kisses Milk Chocolate palette. This one is my least favorite because it is super cool toned. I don't really wear cool tones. This is probably my least used Glamlite palettes because of just how cool tone this is. It's just not my vibe and I don't ever think about this palette. The formula is amazing on this palette. It's the color story for me. I'm not a cool toned kind of girl. I don't know, I just feel like cool tones just don't look that good on me. The next palette is gonna go to the Hershey Kisses Milk Chocolate with Almonds palette. I know. It's like literally the opposite spectrum of the last palette I just showed you, but this is also a Glamlite palette I just don't reach for. I do love my warm tones, but I just feel like it's the color story here where these shades are just not shades that I'm drawn to, and it's just like super warm where, I don't know, there's just another Glamlite palette that's kind of similar to this one, but it has more options that's just ranked higher. So the Hershey Kisses collection was a super cute collection, but it also is only 6 shades and there's only so much I can do with the 6 shades. That's why I ranked this one where I did. But I also love the packaging. The packaging is so cute. It literally looks like a Hershey's Kisses, okay? And I also did see Giselle, the owner of Glamlite, tease another Hershey's collection, I think. I'm always looking at her Instagram story, but don't quote me on that, but I feel like she did kind of tease another one in the works. Next palette in the ranking goes to the Mini Paint palette. Now, I love colorful eyeshadows. We all know this. We know I live for a colorful shadow, but this palette kind of has similar color stories that Glamlite has came out with more recently than this one. I feel like this formula is still really good, but I feel like Glamlite has truly perfected their formula since this palette, and there's just another palette that I prefer over this one. That is a rainbow palette from Glamlite. Don't get me wrong, Glamlite has literally one of my favorite eyeshadow formulas next to Beauty Bay, but this is a ranking and I gotta rank these palettes, okay? I got to. So this one is ranked where it is because of that reason. So the next palette might come as a surprise to some of you, but it is this one right here from the Hershey's collection. This is a special dark palette. So we all know that I love purple palettes, but there's another purple palette from Glamlite that I just love so much more that's ranked so much higher than this one. It's just, once again, the sizing. I feel like every time that I pick up this palette, I create similar looks. I mean, that is to be expected with only 6 shades to choose from. So that's why I ranked this where I did. Next palette is the Glamlite Cake palette. I remember when this palette first came out. Oh my gosh. Now this one is ranked where it's ranked because this is not that intensely, like really buttery, smooth Glamlite formula. It's still a really good formula, but I feel like their formula is just so much different now. But it is such a beautiful palette. I do love the fact that it has like your blues and your purples. It has everything you need to create a sunset look. It's a really pretty palette. Like this used to be one of my favorite Glamlite palettes. And then of course Glamlite started to expand their range. But I really love this palette. It's so pretty. The shimmers in here are absolutely stunning. This is also a really great like summer themed palette as well. But of course, like I said, I gotta rank them. Next palette goes to the Glamlite Red Velvet Cupcake palette. This palette is so pretty. This is such a beautiful pinky purple mauve color story. I love it. You can already tell which one is my favorite shade in this palette. It is so beautiful. I love everything about this palette. I wish that we could have seen more of these like cupcake themed palettes from Glamlite because we saw this like 2 or 3 years ago and we never saw any other cupcakes from this, but I also love the size of this. This is a 12 pan palette and I feel like it's perfect to travel with. I do hope in the future we see more more of these sized palettes from Glamlite because I do think it's like the perfect size of a palette. Next palette goes to the Hershey's Cookies and Cream palette. Wow, now that I'm actually doing this video, I feel like there's so many Hershey palettes, but don't worry, there's only like one more after this one. It's a really pretty blue palette. It's very monochromatic, which once again, I don't really reach for a lot. Very rarely I'm wanting to do a monochromatic eyeshadow look. I do like to have variety. I like to go, you know, a nice gradient of light to dark. With this one, I can only do so much, and I have so many blue themed palettes in my collection to where this is not one that I'm always gravitating to reach for. I would reach for other blue palettes with more variety than this one. More so like my Beauty Bay, you know, Midnight's palette, but it's still really pretty and it's definitely higher up there than the other Hershey palettes. The next palette is the last Hershey palette, don't worry, but this one is definitely my favorite Hershey palette in the collection because I feel like I get so much variety from this. This shade right here is my favorite shimmer shade. It is so gorgeous and so reflective. I feel like every time I pull out this palette, I do get a different look out of it. I feel like there's just so much variation in this palette. It's so beautiful and I really do love this one. If you're thinking of picking up any of the Hershey palettes, I would definitely recommend picking up this one, especially for the variety that you get with each of these shades. I feel like every time I pull out this one I do get the most different looks, you know? So I really love this one out of all of the Hershey's. The next palette in the ranking is gonna go to the Glamlite Frosted Flakes palette. When you look at the outside of this palette, just know that the inside is exactly what you get. It is literally a Frosted Flakes box. This is Frosted Flakes in a palette. I love the color story of this. I feel like Glamlite really is killing it with their color stories. I absolutely love them. This one is so beautiful. This one is ranked where it is because I don't really pair these colors together. I do love the variety of blues in here. I do need to pull this out and play with this a little bit more. It's so beautiful. Every time I look at this palette, it's just stunning. I've been seeing this at TJ Maxx and Marshalls a lot, so if you're loving this palette, definitely check out your local TJ Maxx and Marshalls because I've been seeing it there a lot. Next palette is the Margarita palette, and this one is from the Happy Hour collection, which is definitely one of my favorite collections that Glamlite has done. I feel like it was executed so beautifully. I loved the color stories of these, but this one is definitely my least favorite out of all of the Happy Hour palettes. It is the most colorful, I will say. It's really pretty. Like, don't get me wrong, it's very pretty, but I do feel like I have another Glamlite palette that I just prefer so much more than this one that kind of has a similar color story, but the formula on this palette is so beautiful. I absolutely love it. And if you love like these pastel-y kind of tones, definitely check this one out. And also if you like the smaller size palette like this, I would check this out. The next palette goes to the Dirty Martini palette from the Happy Hour collection. If you love greens, you're gonna live for this palette. It's such a beautiful palette. I love the variety of this. This one's definitely a different kind of palette that we've seen from Glamlite. It's so beautiful. It's monochromatic, but it's also kind of like not, because there's like really different tones of green that kind of look almost like brownie that doesn't really make it a full monochromatic green palette. I love the variety that you get in this palette. It's so beautiful and so stunning. It's so good. The next palette is the Scooby-Doo Creeps and Crawls palette. I ranked this where I ranked it because, first of all, this palette is so pretty, but it's so grungy. But I ranked this where I ranked this because these shimmers in this palette are so similar to each other. Like these purples look the exact same. Like these two on the end, not this one, but like these two look so similar where it's like, ooh, I kind of wish we had a different shade, maybe a extremely lighter shade of purple. I also feel the same way with like the blues. I feel like these blues are so similar. So that's why I ranked this where I ranked it. I love the shimmers though. I love the color story of this palette, but I just wish, oh my gosh, my hand is so stained. I just wish that there was so like more variety with these shimmers. Like a lot of these shimmers could have been other shimmer shades. There's something about this shimmer formula in this palette that is not like any other Glamlite shimmers. I feel like the formula in these Scooby-Doo palettes as well as the Barbie Glamlite palette are just so different than all the rest. It's like they said, we're pulling out the best of the best formula for these palettes. And that is why it's ranked so high, because of how high quality the formula feels and performs. But I do wish that there was more variation with the shimmers. Next palette in the ranking goes to the Wine palette from the Happy Hour collection. This right here is the prettiest purple palette that I've seen from Glamlite. Glamlite has definitely tried their hand at a few different purple themed palettes. This one is really pretty. I love the variety in this palette. I feel like there's so many different tones of purple that I didn't even know there was, and I just love using this whenever I want to do a purple look. This is the palette that I'm reaching for. I really, really love it. It's so stunning. The next palette goes to the Chocolate Martini palette, and this is actually the palette that I'm wearing on my eyes today. This is such a really beautiful neutral palette. I love the variety that you get in here. It literally looks like chocolates, like different tones of chocolate, and I love the eye look that I created today. It's a very, very pretty palette. Glamlite doesn't really do neutral palettes, but this one is definitely ranked high because there aren't many neutral palettes that Glamlite has come out with, but I love, love, love this color story. I would love to see more neutrals for those of you who love neutral palettes. If you are into neutrals and you want to try Glamlite, definitely recommend checking out the Chocolate Martini palette. It is so beautiful. Next ranking goes to this one. This one is the newest Glamlite palette. This is the Glamlite X Chucky palette. Now, this is a palette that truly has made me step outside of my comfort zone, but I love that. I love this palette for what it is. Though the color story is not something that I would reach for all the time, I still can sit and appreciate this color story for what it is, for what they dreamed up, and I think they knocked it out of the park with this palette. I love a palette that makes me think, and I do think that if this was the kind of tones that I went for on the regular, this would be the best palette ever because of just how well executed. There's so many different tones. It's giving grungy. It's giving, you know, what it needs to give, and I love that. That's why I ranked it where I did, and the packaging is sick, okay? It is so sick, and I love it. Number 5 goes to the Michaela Part 2 palette. I love these size palettes so much because they are bigger palettes, but they are just like the perfect size. There's so many beautiful, beautiful shades in here. This one is very jewel toned. I feel like if you were to pick up this palette, this is a palette where it's like, because there's only blue, green, and purple, this has to be like something that you like. So I know a lot of people have their mixed feelings about the color story of this, but I do really, really love these tones, and they're just so beautiful. And honestly, the shimmers in this palette really make this palette for me. Not even gonna lie, those shimmers are top tier. Number 4 goes to the OG Michaela palette. I remember when this palette first came out, I absolutely love this palette. I love using this palette to travel because this palette has everything that I need. There is my neutrals, I have my colors, every single shade that I can imagine. I have it in here except for a black, which would have been nice, but I have taken this palette to travel with multiple times, and I have literally loved it every time. My favorite shade in this palette is this one called Audrey. It's so beautiful, and all over the lid, it is just absolutely stunning. But I do love taking this palette to travel with, especially if you're just getting into Glamlite. I feel like this is a great palette to pick up for the first time, to try out the formula, because you have your pastels, you have so many different shades to choose from. I just feel like it's such a great palette for beginners if you're new to Glamlite. Number 3 goes to the Scooby-Doo Rutro Raggy palette. Oh my gosh, I live for this palette. I have just become so obsessed with this palette. This palette is so beautiful. It's one of my favorite color stories from Glamlite. I really, really love this palette. Once again, the formula on this was beautiful. I love it. I also just love the tones. Green and blue have become my favorite color combination. I absolutely love this palette so much, which is why it's number 3. Highly recommend checking out this palette because it's so good, and the formula is just top tier. Like, you cannot go wrong with this palette. You just can't. My number 2 Glamlite palette used to be my favorite until a certain palette came out, but number 2 goes to the Ice Cream Dream palette. This is a pastel lover's dream. If you love pastels and you're in the market for a really good pastel palette, I highly recommend this one from Glamlite. It is so beautiful, and I love this palette because This palette works for all skin tones. It shows up true to color. I don't really buy a lot of pastel palettes because of this one, because it has everything that I need. I'm gonna swatch some of these pastels so you can just see how, look at that. Like just even from that, like you can just see how true to color these are. Like you just cannot go wrong with this palette. Oh my gosh, Pinky is not swatching very well. But like, look at that. It's just so beautiful and so true to color. Like it has everything that you need. This one is one of their older palettes. It still has that good Glamlite formula, but it doesn't have like the Scooby-Doo formula or the Barbie formula. I feel like Glamlite has a couple different formulas. Still good quality formula, but I just wanted to let you know this is a different kind of formula. It's a really beautiful palette, so many different shades. If you love pastels, definitely recommend this one. It's my second favorite Glamlite palette, so you cannot go wrong. Glamlite X Barbie palette. Who saw this coming? Because I feel like the past couple of months, this is the only palette that I've talked about. It is so pretty. Oh my gosh, this is such a beautiful, beautiful palette. The shades are intense, but I love that. They have like this, Glamlite has this formula that they've been using recently where it's more of like a creamy, you know, putty like formula. You can just tell from this shade in the pan. I love this palette so much. I cannot get enough of this palette. Highly recommend this. Oh my gosh, that shimmer, beautiful. Like there's some really pretty, you know, duochromes in here. It's just so stunning. I highly recommend this palette. If I could just recommend one palette to get from Glamlite for sure, like if you love these tones, it would be this one. I just love it. Every time I do my eyeshadow, I want to just pull this palette out because of just how beautiful and true to color these are. I love it. And every time I pull this out, I get so inspired and I just absolutely love it. I just love Glamlite so much and I get so excited. Like I can't wait to see what else they come out with. Just love to see over the years how Glamlite just tops my favorite Glamlite palette. This one, the Ice Cream Dream, used to be my favorite Glamlite palette, but then this one came out and it just took over. But I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Let me know your thoughts down below. This one was so fun to film. If you want to see any other palette rankings, let me know. I can definitely do a beauty bay if that's something you're interested in. Let me know down below and I will catch you guys in my next video. Bye guys.